The most expensive mistake I ever made wasn't trusting the wrong people. It wasn't getting divorced. It wasn't staying too long. It wasn't giving second chances. The most expensive mistake I ever made was confusing love with responsibility. And for years, I didn't even realize I was doing it. When I was younger, I believed something that sounds beautiful on the surface. I believed that if you truly loved someone, you stayed. You helped. You supported. You sacrificed. You carried them through difficult seasons. I believed that was what loyalty looked like. And to a certain extent, it is. But somewhere along the way, I crossed a line I didn't know existed. I stopped loving people and started taking responsibility for them. At first, that doesn't sound like a problem. In fact, many people will praise you for it. They'll call you caring, selfless, compassionate, strong. But what nobody tells you is that taking responsibility for other people's lives comes with a cost, a very heavy cost. Because once you start believing someone else's outcome depends on you, you never get to rest. You're constantly thinking, constantly worrying, constantly trying to solve problems that don't belong to you. And eventually, you begin carrying weights you were never meant to carry. Looking back now, I can see that so much of my suffering came from this misunderstanding. I thought love meant helping someone become who they were capable of becoming. I thought if I loved hard enough, supported enough, sacrificed enough, eventually things would improve. I wasn't trying to change people. At least that's not how I saw it at the time. I genuinely believed I was helping. But there is a difference between supporting someone's growth and becoming responsible for it. And I didn't understand that difference. I remember spending years believing that if I could just explain myself one more time, maybe things would click. Maybe they would understand. Maybe they would see what I saw. Maybe they would finally choose differently. Maybe things would get better. Have you ever done that? Have you ever sat awake at night trying to solve somebody else's life? Trying to find the perfect words, the perfect solution, the perfect way to help, as though the right combination of love and effort could somehow create change in another person? I have. And what I eventually learned is something that was incredibly painful to accept. You can love someone deeply and still be unable to save them. You can support them, encourage them, pray for them, believe in them, give them opportunities, give them second chances, and they can still choose a different path. Because every human being has something that nobody else can control: choice. That realization broke something inside me, but it also set me free. Because for years, I had been carrying outcomes that were never mine to carry. I had been measuring my success by whether other people changed. Think about how exhausting that is. Your peace depends on someone else's decisions. Your happiness depends on someone else's growth. Your future depends on someone else's willingness to heal. That's not peace. That's emotional imprisonment. I remember reaching a point where I was carrying far more than my share of a relationship. And the strange thing is, I didn't see it clearly at the time. I thought I was being supportive. I thought I was being patient. I thought I was standing by someone during a difficult season. But looking back now, I can see something very different. The more I gave, the more was expected. The more understanding I became, the more understanding was required. The more patient I became, the more patience was requested. There was always another promise, another explanation, another apology, another reason things would be different soon, another request for more time. And because I genuinely cared, I kept believing it. Not because I was naive, because I wanted to believe the best in someone I loved. I wanted to believe that if a person could clearly see the damage they were causing, they would eventually choose differently. And to be fair, he often admitted when he was wrong. He would apologize. He would acknowledge his mistakes. He would tell me he was trying. He would tell me he was struggling. He would tell me he needed more time. And every time I wanted to believe him, because when you love someone, hope can become very persuasive. But eventually I had to confront a difficult truth. Acknowledging a problem is not the same as changing it. Feeling bad about your behavior is not the same as correcting it. And repeatedly apologizing does not undo repeatedly causing harm. What I failed to recognize was that while I was focused on helping him heal, I was slowly abandoning myself. My needs were becoming smaller. My expectations were becoming smaller. My standards were becoming smaller. I was becoming so focused on understanding his struggles that I stopped asking whether anyone was trying to understand mine. I was becoming so focused on helping him become better that I stopped asking whether I was receiving what I needed as a wife, as a woman, and as the mother of his children. And that is one of the greatest dangers of confusing love with responsibility. You become so focused on carrying another person that you stop noticing how heavy your own burden has become. You become so focused on their growth that you stop paying attention to your own well-being. And because you're constantly looking at what they could become, you stop evaluating what they are consistently choosing to be. That realization changed me, because I finally understood that love is not measured by how much you are willing to tolerate. Love is not measured by how much pain you can endure. Love is not measured by how many times you rescue someone. And love is certainly not measured by how much of yourself you sacrifice trying to save another person. One of the biggest turning points in my life came when I started asking a different question. Instead of asking, "How do I help this person change?" I started asking, "Why do I feel responsible for changing them?" That question changed everything, because the answer wasn't really about them. It was about me. It was about my beliefs. It was about how I viewed love. It was about how I viewed my worth. For a long time, being needed felt the same as being loved. If somebody depended on me, I felt valuable. If somebody needed my help, I felt important. If somebody leaned on me, I felt connected. But being needed and being loved are not the same thing. A person can need you and still not value you. A person can depend on you and still not respect you. A person can rely on your support and still refuse to grow. And if your self-worth becomes attached to being needed, you'll unconsciously seek situations where people constantly need saving. You become the fixer, the rescuer, the caretaker, and eventually you wake up exhausted, wondering why you're always carrying so much. The older I get, the more I realize that true love often looks very different than I once believed. Sometimes love means supporting someone. Sometimes love means encouraging someone. And sometimes love means stepping back and allowing them to experience the consequences of their own choices, not because you don't care, because you do, but because growth cannot be outsourced. Nobody can heal on someone else's behalf. Nobody can become disciplined on someone else's behalf. Nobody can become accountable on someone else's behalf. Nobody can recover on someone else's behalf. Those decisions belong to the individual, not to the people who love them. One of the most comforting things I eventually found was realizing that this idea is deeply rooted in Islam. Allah never asked me to control outcomes. He asked me to do my best. There is a difference. I can be kind. I can be supportive. I can make dua. I can show compassion. I can offer guidance. But I cannot live another person's life for them. And once I truly understood that, something inside me became lighter, because I stopped carrying responsibilities that belong to Allah. I stopped acting as though everything depended on me. I stopped believing that every problem needed my intervention. I stopped trying to save people who were not ready to save themselves. And in that space, I found something unexpected: peace. Not because life became easy, not because people stopped making bad decisions, not because hardship disappeared, but because I finally understood where my responsibility ended. I think there are people listening to this right now who are exhausted for the same reason I was. Not because you're weak, not because you're incapable, because you're carrying things that were never yours to carry. Other people's healing, other people's growth, other people's choices, other people's futures. And maybe the lesson you need today is the same lesson I needed. Love people, support people, pray for people, be there for people. But do not confuse loving someone with becoming responsible for them, because you can spend years trying to save someone who has no intention of saving themselves. And while you're focused on rescuing them, you slowly abandon yourself. If there is one thing I hope you remember from this video, it's this. You are not responsible for carrying everyone. You are not responsible for fixing everyone. You are not responsible for saving everyone. You are responsible for your character, your effort, your intentions, your faith. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is place someone in Allah's hands and step back. Because what saved me wasn't learning how to save everyone else. What saved me was finally understanding that I couldn't. And strangely enough, that realization brought me more peace than all the years I spent trying. I'll see you in the next video.